My brother Paul went missing here on July 13th.
A search is currently underway for a missing hiker out in Joshua Tree. Authorities say 51-year-old Canadian citizen Paul Miller has been missing
and heartache while the search for the Guelph hiker missing in California has been scaled back. Family and friends of 51-year-old Paul Miller are praying.
51-year-old Paul Miller went off on a hike alone. He called his wife Friday morning from the 49 Palms trailhead, and that's the last time anyone's heard from him.
Thousands of people have mysteriously vanished in America's wilderness. Join us as we dive into the deep end of the unexplainable and try to piece together what happened. You are listening to Locations Unknown.
All right, welcome to episode 2 of the Locations Unknown podcast. I'm your host, Mike Van de Bogart. Sitting alongside of me is our co-host, Joe Arado. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Mike.
We have a very interesting case for you today, a little different than what we did in our first episode, in that this case is very recent. The case is about a Canadian by the name of Paul Miller who disappeared in Joshua Tree National Park this July. The search is still ongoing. We were also lucky enough to sit down with the public information officer of Joshua Tree National Park, and we're going to be playing that interview a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, we'll cut in and out to it for parts that...
Yeah,
it runs long if we play it straight. So
we don't want to bore you. But George has a very unique insight in the park. He's worked there for 8 years and involved in every aspect of the search. And it's great hearing from someone who was on the ground there. So we'll get to that in a bit. First here, though, Joe is kind of going to go over a bit of the profile of the park.
Yep, so following the normal format that we're doing, we'll give you a location profile. Cut in at some point, we'll have George tell you more information about the park because he's there all the time. And then we'll get into the character profile, timeline, and then the theories. So, as Mike mentioned when we opened the show, it's Joshua Tree National Park. It's in California. It's in San Bernardino County and Riverside County, so it straddles both those areas because it's a very large park. It was originally declared a national monument in 1936. Joshua Tree was redesignated as national park in 1994 when U.S. Congress passed the California Desert Protection Act. So it's just recently become a national park. If you're going to go camping there, there's 9 established campgrounds. 2 have water and flush toilets that can be reserved. So that's more your car camping. And I know we talked about that. That's typically not our scene. We're more backcountry. But when it comes to desert, that might be nice. The other campgrounds are first come, first serve. Backcountry camping is permitted with a few regulations. So it's like any typical park. You can do some backcountry. You have to let them know where you're going. That's usually for search and rescue purposes. So they do charge for those permits, but they're inexpensive. But they want to know where you're at and when you're going to check back in.
Yeah, it's every place we've ever hiked, we always have to go to the permit office. And it's primarily so, yeah, they can keep a catalog of people coming in and out of the park for this very reason.
Absolutely. So if you're going to be hiking, there are several established trails within the park. Many can be accessed from campgrounds, shorter trails such as 1 mile hike through Hidden Valley. You can see the beauty of the park without staying too far in the desert. So there's a lot of hiking available to people who are not as experienced. Although, as George will tell you later in the interview, they do have some issues with people coming out there not dressing appropriately or not knowing what really to expect in a desert climate. Because even if you're only walking a mile, if you're in 105 degrees in the middle of the day with dry heat and you don't have enough water, that can make a big difference.
You sometimes won't even know you're sweating. It will just evaporate right off of you. And the next thing you know, you're dehydrated.
Yeah.
So it's...
Yeah, single bottle water typically doesn't cut it. That's when you need to go out with gallons just for yourself. The last trail you've seen on was the 49 Palm Oasis. We won't get into that just yet, but that's one of the trails that he was on where they found his car. It's not too big of a trail. It's not too hard of a trail. Some of the terrain that exists there, just lots of rock, lots of desert. The animals there, snakes, scorpions, spiders, coyotes, mountain lions. George is going to talk about that in a little bit. Exposure is just significant heat and sun. So what we're going to do now is we're going to cut to introduce George. As Mike said, he's the PIO of Joshua Tree National Park. We're going to cut to George and have him talk a little bit more about the description of the park and what it's like there. George, thank you very much for coming on the show. And if you could please introduce yourself and give us a brief background.
Yeah, my name is George Land. I am the Public Information Officer and Community Outreach Ranger here at Joshua Tree National Park.
Excellent. So I'm just going to ask you a couple questions about the park and then specifically about the hazards, and we'll just go forward from there. So roughly how many visitors are at your park each year that come through?
Well, we're in a serious upswing. When I got here about 8 years ago, we were at 1.3 million a year, and this year, 8 years later, we're going to break probably the 3.2 million mark. So we've doubled, more than doubled, in the last 8 years.
Oh, wow. So there's been a serious uptick in visitors, and I'm guessing issues can come along with that as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, the more people that you have coming to the park, it lends itself to the possibilities of more incidents. But considering the fact that we had about 3.2 million people in the park this past year, if you put those numbers out on the Santa Monica Freeway or driving around in their automobiles, we're really pretty safe up here. I mean, it's not a situation where, it's one incident or search and rescue after another.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about the park, its history, some significant features? Because what we try and do is paint a picture of what the climate is like there and what's unique about that park for people that haven't even seen pictures or ever been there before.
Sure, I'd be glad to. Joshua Tree National Park is located in Southern California. We're in the high desert for the most part. It's actually where two distinct desert ecosystems come together. We have the Colorado Desert, which is an extension of the Sonoran that runs through Arizona and Mexico and those areas. And we have the Mojave, which is in the higher elevations, and that's where the majority of the Joshua trees are. And also a lot of the popular Monza granite rock formations that makes us kind of an international rock climbing destination. We are almost 800,000 square acres. To put that into perspective, that's over 12,000 square miles, or to make it a little bit easier, we're a little larger than the state of Rhode Island.
Okay, so it's a big park you got to manage.
It's a fairly large park, yeah. There are bigger parks, but given the fact that we're kind of a natural island surrounded by a sea of humanity, within 3.5 hour drive of our entrance stations, we probably have close to 30 million people that live around the area. So we also have a lot of the same challenges and pressures that a lot of those communities in Southern California have as well.
With that large of a park, I mean, it's basically a state in and of itself. How common is it for people to go missing there, and do you find most of them within a certain amount of time?
Yeah, we really do. It's not extremely common. We do have people that are late on what we call late on arrival, and sometimes when they get to be a certain point and the friends or family or people that are with them get concerned, they notify us. Generally, those people tend to show up within a few hours of the report. We do, unfortunately, have times when there are people that are out on the trail, they're disoriented, they get turned around off the trail, or because we have so many rock formations up here, it's tough to keep people off the rocks. And not that we want to, but when you climb rocks, there is one law that is very strictly enforced in Joshua Tree National Park, and that's the law of gravity. And so, sometimes people meet less than fortunate circumstances just by falling off a rock or down into a crevice or that type of thing. And that's when we have to go out and take a look around and find them and bring them back to their family and loved ones.
So falling hazards are obviously a big thing, and I know just from Mike and I are very experienced hikers, and we climb as well too. And whenever we go into parks that have become more popular, and even just in general, people getting out in the wilderness is becoming more popular. You have a lot of inexperienced people going out, maybe doing things they shouldn't. So outside of fall hazards, what are some of the other hazards that people would run into or expect to run into at your park?
Well, and that's a really good point, Joe. We have one of our scenarios up here city kid comes out from L.A., is not used to the desert, has flip-flops on and what's left of their thirst buster, and takes off on a 7-mile hike on a day where it's 105 degrees.
Sure.
So, that usually does not end well. And so we do have issues with that segment of visitor that's just not prepared for the hike. And there are places because of the terrain here in Joshua Tree National Park, there are places where you can get turned around. I mean, even experienced hikers occasionally, get a little misdirected and maybe 2, 3, 4 hours later have to end up spending the night in the park. Very seldom do we have major searches and rescues. We probably had more last year than what I can remember in the almost 9 years that I've been here. And one of those I know you wanted to talk about, unfortunately, is of a gentleman from Canada that went missing back in July. And unfortunately, we still have not been able to bring closure to that particular incident.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very sad story, and we're going to talk more about Paul's profile later in the show, but from what it seemed like, he was a very experienced hiker, and he was even in the park the day before. So just when we looked at his case, it didn't seem like it was just, like you said, kind of a city slicker coming out for the first time, really wanting to enjoy the outdoors. He seemed to know what he was doing. And I know the last time he was seen was on the 49 Palms Oasis Trail. Can you give us a little bit of background about that trail in particular?
Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward trail. It goes in actually from outside the border of the park. You walk in, and in other words, you don't have to go through an entrance station to access the trail. Okay. It goes in about 1.5 miles to a natural oasis where there's a spring out there. The bighorn sheep come down to water there. There's a number of very mature Washingtonian palm trees that are indigenous to this part of the country that are out there. And then when you're done, you turn around and you walk back the same trail 1.5 miles back out. So that is one of the things that has kind of been a mystery, is how to get turned around if he did in fact stay on the trail or ever made it to the trail. I mean, there's a lot of different theories out there now, just because we have steadily been in that area. Our Joshua Tree National Park Search and Rescue has been doing training exercises out there ever since we called off or reduced the search for Mr. Miller. And technically, Joe, in the National Park, the search for someone who is missing or lost never totally stops.
Sure.
Obviously, it's not sustainable to keep 100 troops out there beating the bushes and helicopters and canine teams and that type of thing. I mean, there comes a point where that has to cease. But we make those areas part of our ongoing training scenarios for our search and rescue teams. And so we've been out there on a regular basis.
Thank you, George. And if you could just hang on, we're going to go over Paul's description with Mike, and then we'll come back to you for some more information.
Paul Miller obviously was from Canada, a city called Guelph in Ontario, Canada. He was 51 years old. He had a wife and 2 kids. His wife, Stephanie, is a kindergarten teacher in the Waterloo region, and Paul was a materials manager at a water treatment and filtration company. Both their kids are in public high school. So the description of Paul,
They graduated public high school.
Graduated public high school, sorry.
Yeah, they're college age now.
Paul, pretty typical male, 5'5", 160 pounds. He had salt and pepper hair, so graying a bit. The clothing he was last seen in, he was wearing dark shorts, dark gray, almost black, high-tech altitude hiking boots, black hat, and carrying sunglasses. He also did have a Camelback for hydration and a Nikon D5300 camera. His personality, medical issues, everything that we could find researching Paul, happily married to his wife for 26 years, no issues at home, no issues at work, so everything seems normal.
Yeah, nothing jumps out as...
No.
Like we've said in the prior episode, we look for red flags to help really identify what could have happened in these cases, and everything seems normal.
Everything checks out so far.
Yep.
And another box that checks out is his experience in the backcountry. Paul and his wife like to go on a lot of vacations, and they like to mix in a lot of backcountry hiking in those vacations. So they've been in Canada, North America, Mexico, and everyone described him as a moderate to advanced hiker. We kind of see him as someone like ourselves who have gone on a lot of backcountry hikes. And
yeah, I'd say we're not experts in the sense where there's guys that live.
We're not
in
Survivor,
Colorado.
man.
Exactly, but we're going on trips. That's what we do on vacation. We go on these trips. We find new places, and we've been to all different climates from freezing to desert and know generally what to do in each one. You know, anyone can get hurt in those, but we know what we're doing. This seems like that type of guy.
Yeah, he seems like a kind of guy that if something did happen to him, he would keep a calm, level head and figure out a way out of it.
Yeah, I think he would know what to do in a dire situation where other people might panic, and their panic can inevitably lead to making bad decisions. Like I said, me and Mike don't know him personally. We've never talked to him. We haven't talked to his family, unfortunately. But just based on the history and what they've said, you don't do that many hiking, backcountry trips, kayaking, whatever, and not learn a thing or two about what to do.
Exactly. It's this is a big red flag for, any case where you see someone going missing. If they're experienced, that just makes it a lot more puzzling.
And George talked about it in the interview too. He said they'll have an issue with their city slickers coming out from LA that are wearing flip flops, and they have just like a water bottle, and they're like, "Let's go hike in the desert," and they have to go get them or something like that because they don't know what they're getting themselves into. So this doesn't seem like what Paul was like.
Yeah, high desert hiking, if you're not prepared, can be deadly. We've all been on hikes personally where we've experienced issues with lack of water and exposure to sun, and
the part where it's you don't think it's dire yet, but you're starting to go.
By the time
we need some water now.
by the time you actually feel dehydrated, it's almost too late at that point.
Yeah,
you go any further into dehydration, you're going to start getting delirious, and you're not going to be making clear decisions. But so that's a basic profile of Paul. You're pretty typical middle-aged man. He had a good family life, 2 grown kids, experienced hiker. Joe now is going to start going into the timeline of what actually happened, what led to his disappearance.
Yeah, so we have some good times and dates here that we're going to go over on like last episode. We're going to start off why he was out there. Paul and his wife, Stephanie, were on vacation in California, Nevada, and including Las Vegas. They're celebrating their 26th wedding anniversary. So, again, you're not going to go on a great wedding anniversary trip with your wife if you're not happy in your marriage. So, I mean, that's where, from everyone, the interviews I've watched, and you guys can find these on YouTube. There's a ton of interviews and reports of the family. He seemed like a great guy, and everyone seemed to like him. And, they have their friends they have a GoFundMe page for him.
People are coming out that he knew to help search.
Exactly. We're going to go over that. I mean, so people don't help or want to get that involved for someone that wasn't a good guy. So they're out here for their wedding anniversary, and it was not uncommon for them to do the backwoods camping, hiking, and kayaking. That's what they would do together. So that's, again, playing into his experience. So July 12th of 2018, both Paul and his wife were hiking in the park and came back to their hotel room at the 29 Palms. So not only is he an avid hiker, he spent time the day before in that environment. So even if you're going to make a mistake somewhere or realize you didn't pack appropriately, that's going to be your first day out. Mm-hmm. So he was out the day before, and it was July 13th that he essentially went missing. So this is the first date on July 13th. They're prepping to leave the hotel room, and Paul wanted to do one more short hike, try and get a photo of the bighorn sheep. That's why he had that camera with him. So he really wanted to get a good photo of the sheep. So he, at 9 a.m., left the hotel room and drove his car to the 49 Palms Oasis Trailhead. At 11 a.m., Stephanie said she started to become concerned that he didn't return, but decided to wait another hour. So Palms Oasis Trailhead is roughly 1.5 miles. After I go through the timeline, we'll cut back to the interview. We'll have George talk a little bit about the trailhead itself to give you the features. But it's not a difficult trail. It's very short. and it doesn't even loop. So you go up one way and you come back the exact same way. So it's not a difficult one to really get up and down. At 11 a.m., Stephanie said she was concerned, but not really ringing the alarm bells just yet because you can be late on arrival. That's very common.
I mean, maybe he found a bighorn sheep and he was,
exactly.
Took
There's
stop.
many times where I think I'm going to be back at a certain time and I'm probably 2 hours late. When you're walking and you're not sure about the terrain, there's a big window there. But at noon, when Paul still didn't return, she contacted the Park Service because she was worried and reported him as missing. Park Service jumped right into action. They had a team together in 30 minutes. So they had a team ready together. And they started the search. They immediately found Paul's rental car at the trailhead. So he hadn't left. The car was there, so he went to the trailhead. And the park superintendent, David Smith, said there was one witness who saw Paul in the morning at the trailhead. So there was somebody who saw someone else, or they talked to a witness that saw someone who met the description of Paul at the trailhead. So I think we can reasonably believe that he went to that trailhead. So it's not one of those instances of he left at 9, his car's not anywhere. Did he even make it to the trail?
Someone saw him at the beginning of the trailhead walking in.
Yeah, and it's a popular trail too, so there's a lot of people there that would notice things like that. So his car was there, somebody saw him there. So we can reasonably say that he began the hike that he planned.
Yep.
They went through, did the search, didn't find Paul that day. And they started the search effort. So they have search teams going. So they're doing that for days and not finding anything. We're going to jump forward to September now, where we're going to get into employing some of the technology to do a much wider breadth of area of the park.
Yeah, so September rolls around. Park officials actually closed the trail for a few days because they brought in some new technology, which George will explain when we talk to him. But this technology, basically, it's a helicopter with high-res photography equipment on the bottom of it, and it takes really quick pictures. It basically is looking for anything out of the ordinary in the wildlife, and then it takes those pictures, they put it into a program, and then it analyzes that. So
they shut it down so that there wouldn't be people there to throw off the imaging. So they wanted clean desert, and they're going to search for anomalies that aren't desert, essentially.
So this happened on Tuesday, the 18th of September, and then by the next day, on Wednesday, there was still no word of any new discoveries for the search of Miller. So the trail was then reopened on the 20th. The park officials mentioned that it will take some time to get those pictures analyzed. Talking with George, he'll go into it in more detail, but they spared no expense and no manpower in looking for Paul. They brought out everything that they have to their availability was in that park looking for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're talking hundreds of people, K-9 units, helicopters, over 6,000 man-hours were put into looking for Paul. A lot of the problems they were running into would probably have been the same problems Paul experienced, potentially. A lot of the searchers were experiencing a lot of heat exhaustion, so a lot of them would try to wake up at 4 a.m., go out and search, and by 9 a.m. they'd be back at camp, exhausted because it's 105 degrees, very low humidity. Even, prepared search and rescue people are succumbing to exposure out there. So that was a major obstacle that hindered some of the search and rescue efforts. One side note that we noticed in one of the articles we're reading was there was a lot of frustration with the family. The rental car company kept charging Paul while he was missing. And we recently just read that the rental car company, which we won't name, they issued an apology and rescinded all the charges.
Yeah, so, it seemed more like it was like a paperwork thing because I'm sure
amazing.
They're renting hundreds of cars a day and then
every one of
one's
these
not getting returned.
Yeah, every one of these cases, the family's going through enough with trying to find their missing loved one, and then you've got things like
no one was worried about getting the rental car back.
Yeah,
nor should they be.
That's the last thing on their minds.
Exactly.
Is, I got to get this car back by noon.
Yeah.
So that is kind of what happened in September, and like I said, George is going to go into further detail on the search and rescue efforts.
Yeah, we had a company come in. It's actually a Canadian company that takes rapid fire photographs from a helicopter and then comes back and the computer analyzes those for anything that any color gradation or whatever that looks different than what the natural terrain should look. And we had them come in and fly over, and additional things like that we've done to try to bring closure to this. Still have not been able to find any trace of Mr. Miller.
I've seen some search and rescues underway, and you guys are extremely thorough. And from what I read, you have the dogs out. You have this incredible new technology where it's and I'm assuming, you can correct me if I'm wrong, does it scan the landscape and kind of take that and then just look for anything that doesn't fit?
Yeah. That's exactly what it does. Like I said, things that the human eye necessarily wouldn't pick up on a flyover, this actually goes in and it makes all these, it almost looks like a tiny mosaic when you see what's produced by it, and then they feed that into the program that the company has developed, and any anomalies that come out, it kicks it out and says, okay, at this quadrant, and given the GPS coordinates, and that we found this, there was a patch of blue or something, and like I said, it was without any positive results as well.
It's incredible, the technology that they're using, and obviously with the people on the ground and everything too. It's just really unfortunate that there isn't closure for his family yet. So thank you very much for that update on Paul's case. Are there any other unsolved missing persons cases in that park currently that you're still kind of ongoing looking for but have scaled back from?
We had a gentleman about 9 years ago from Georgia that had hiked in the park before, that his name was Mr. Owasco, and we found his vehicle with the car door open, a few supply type of things in it, but he has never been located as well. And so that remains a mystery, and also an area, as I mentioned before, Joe, is a place where in the general area of Juniper Flats where his vehicle was located and where he was thought to have taken off hiking, it continues to be an area that we go back and forth over with our training exercises.
Sure.
And search and rescue problems that we present to our rescue team or search teams, and thus far still no indication of what happened to Mr. Owasco.
Are there other animals besides like kind of your small poisonous animals that could potentially get somebody or do something like that, or is it all smaller?
No, we have obviously we have mountain lions in the park, coyotes, which are not known to be aggressive to a live human for the most part.
Sure.
However, they will feed on carrion.
Okay.
So, if someone went out, had a heart attack or some other issue, fell and hit their head and whatever, there are animals that, like coyotes and vultures and some other animals that feed on carrion that, would dispose of the soft tissues of a body.
Okay. And yeah, I just want to reiterate for the listeners, my background is I'm a paramedic, so sometimes I'll come off and ask a lot of these questions that seem kind of morbid, but I'm looking at it from a factual basis, so not to be disrespectful to the families or anything. So if anyone thinks that when they're listening to that, this is just fact-based conversation. So in those cases where you do have animals potentially feeding on someone that's passed, you'll usually find clothing or bone. Are there animals that will then take the bone that will potentially take the clothing for any reason where there could be a potential where there really is no sign or evidence left behind that there was a body even there?
Well, clothing in this type of harsh environment, clothing has a way of either being washed away many times down an arroyo, or because there's not drainage, throughout the desert. When we get a flash flood, it'll wash away everything.
Okay.
So that creates a problem with that. Bones are many times scattered. There's not that many animals that actually make a meal out of the skeletal leftovers, but it's they are scattered and moved around and that type of thing. So, that is a challenge for people trying to reconstruct some of these disappearances in certain areas.
Sure. Yeah, especially like you said, if it rains, then all of a sudden an area you might not have searched yet or went over that it could have been there, it gets moved and things like that.
Which is, 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It also, there have been, situations where we have found clues to different situations because something was washed down, the wash from where it originally was. So,
Okay.
It's one of those things where it's both a blessing and a curse sometimes.
Sure. Okay, so that was information on basically the technology they're employing, and it was really cool to image it as almost like a mosaic. So it's taking a ton of pictures, putting it all together in a large profile, and the computer's just analyzing for anything that stands out, colors, things that don't match a landscape. So it's really, really high-def, high-tech
Piece
stuff.
of clothing.
Yeah, anything. So it's really cool, and they haven't turned up anything as of yet. I know when they first took the images, people are wondering what it saw, and they said back at that time that it takes time, obviously, for the computer to analyze it, but still up to now, they're not seeing any anomalies. So, and they're doing a wide area. I mean, when you're flying over in a helicopter doing that, you're covering area that you probably can't walk.
Yeah.
So as of now, the most recent thing we have updated is on November 6th, was a Tuesday. Dawn Robinson and her husband David Robinson arrived from Canada late Tuesday and have repeatedly hiked the 49 Palms Oasis Trail, accompanied by park rangers and volunteers and other search and rescue team members. Now, Dawn is Paul's sister, so they're still obviously trying to find answers for this, and it's really sad because they're getting no closure at all. Whenever you have any of these unexplained events, it's going to be kind of this open chapter that you can't finish in this story. So she said herself, the fact that he still hasn't been found is just baffling. And that's true, and they're desperate for answers, is what she said.
And we really got the sense with talking with George that, these people that work at the park really care about finding this man too. They take it seriously. And
yeah, I think they take it personally.
They feel bad that they've not been able to find anything yet.
Yeah, I mean, if you can imagine, for the men and women who do search and rescue, that's their job, is search and rescue. So if they have an open case that they're not finding, that's going to hit you hard.
Yeah.
I could imagine, because it seems like a failure. So what they typically end up having to do, and George mentioned in the interview, is that they got to scale down. You can't put 600 people every day, all day long, all the time. You have to inevitably scale back the manhunt. But he said all they do is then, whenever they're doing training operations, they pick their areas based on those areas
where Paul could be.
Exactly. So
Yep.
they're doing their training missions. They're doing the stuff in there, so they're able to mix training with still continually searching for. So they don't ever close cases, as he said. They're leaving them open, and they're always searching to hopefully bring closure to the family. So really, his sister went there hoping that by hiking the trail, she can look at things through her brother's eyes and really come away with clues about what he could have done or what could have happened. So she said they knew he was in a rush that morning. He had a small window of opportunity. He picked the trail based on that he could do a short hike and get back to a hotel within a couple hours. So he left with the idea in mind of, I really want to get a picture of a bighorn sheep, but we're leaving today. Here's a quick trail I can do in a couple hours that I might be able to get my snapshot, and then we can get out of here.
Yep.
And she even said, too, when she's going to trail, her statement was, it's a pretty obvious trail. If you stay on it, you'll get to the oasis and back without any problem. She said it's quite hilly. If you get off the trail, it's hard to see where the trail is, and it disappears quickly. With that said, the town can still be seen from the tops of the hills. So a hiker could get lost, but then as soon as you climb a hill, you can quickly orient yourself.
Yeah, day or night, you're going to see
lights. You're going to see
civilization off in the distance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's a huge park. In regards to, George even said it's bigger than the state of Rhode Island, but the areas that people are occupying are small.
Yeah.
So it's
highly trafficked.
Exactly. So it'd be different if he's got a 42-mile desert trail.
Yep.
And now you have the area the size of a quarter of a state to search for somebody.
Yeah.
It's a small area.
And I'm assuming, being an experienced hiker, if he would have been injured, a lot of times if you're by yourself, one of the best things you do is maybe you take shelter and kind of stay in the place that you got injured, because that gives you the best chance of search and rescue finding you.
Especially on a well-traveled trail.
Well-traveled trail,
You're gonna
exactly.
run into, people saw at the trailhead. Why? Because they were going to the Oasis as well. So it's unlike last case where it's small park, not a lot of visitors.
Yeah.
This one you have a ton of visitors. George even mentioned they've doubled their numbers. They have millions of people come to this park every year. This is a high traffic park, and if you've ever been to a national park with high traffic, it's almost annoying at some of the shorter trails. It'll be crowded. There's when we went to Glacier National Park, we backcountry we hiked, but then we did a couple of the more touristy trails. And there's some times when you're going along a narrow part, you have to stop and let people go by.
That happened. I was hiking out in the Tetons earlier this year, and the section towards the end, it's a traffic jam of people. You're literally waiting for people to go by.
Yeah, so if something happens, you have 20, 30 people reporting it and stuff like that. So the fact that no one saw him outside of just catch him at the trailhead and that was it is a little crazy and a little obscure. So official theories right now, Mike, I mean, what are you hearing from law enforcement, family?
I mean, the most logical and what, people are kind of, hanging their hat on is that maybe he may have tried to climb up on some rocks. Or, he went out there trying to find some bighorn sheep. He maybe tried to climb up on some rocks and slipped and fell into an area that, wouldn't be easily, he wouldn't be easily found when he fell in there. But, Joe and I were talking about all the different possibilities of what could have happened to him, and nothing really makes sense. So you would assume...
Yeah, you have your animal theory, so you have the...
there's no big predators in the park.
There's poisonous snakes, scorpions, there's mountain lions, coyotes. Mountain lions always sound bad, but they typically leave people alone.
Yeah, and one thing you'll know about if you've ever hiked in national parks is, and we always joke about this when we hike, is we never see wildlife because the animals are smart enough to know to kind of steer clear of some of the higher trafficked areas.
Unless it's like Yosemite when they're feeding them.
Yeah.
But even then, they're not attacking the people. They're just going up for them for food, which... we don't condone, but in the more wild areas, you typically don't see them unless you're sneaking around and trying to catch them.
Yeah, and so, the most logical explanation of what happened to Paul, a lot of people are saying, is he was injured, either, climbing on some rocks or going over an obstacle. But then what happened, if he perished out there, what happened to his body? They had canine units all over the park. They had these helicopters taking these high-res photos. If you fall, even if you fall into a crevice or, some type of hole in the ground, dogs are going to find you.
Yeah, that's what's the craziest. And we'll jump into our theories really. So we kind of talked about animals. I think exposure is extremely relevant.
Yeah.
He disappeared around noon in the desert. 105, 110 degrees is not uncommon, dry heat. So I'd say exposure for sure.
Yeah, with exposure, anybody that's hiked in desert climates, dehydration does cause people to not think clearly. I mean, there's a chance that he got dehydrated, wandered off the trail, maybe walked for several miles just out into the desert. Somehow he walked into
some sort of delirious haze. Which,
yeah.
I mean, that's actually a very good point, because you hear about the people that think they see water or things like that in the desert. Granted, he was going towards an oasis, but again, you have a situation where maybe you're just unaware of what's really going on. So he's normally a hiker, but you can kind of get caught in those situations where you're not really sure. And then maybe it was just one of those times he was in the desert the day before.
Yeah.
So he had a lot of sun exposure the day before. Maybe he brought out enough water, but wasn't really attuned to the symptoms that he was having. He's traveling a lot. So if you get out and get delirious, did he go off trail and then think he was on the trail and just kept walking and walking and walking?
Possibility.
That's a possibility. But then again, you have helicopter, you have 6,000 hours of manpower, 600 searchers, canine units.
Yep.
You have all those people.
Plus all of the other people in the park.
Yeah.
Out there. One other possibility is, in our first episode, we talked about one of the leading theories of why Paul Fugate went missing was some type of criminal activity. Mm-hmm. Being that Paul Miller was on a trail that goes in one way and out one way, if someone was trying to rob him for his camera, or, say he, again, came across something that he wasn't supposed to see, there's only one way in and out of there.
Yeah.
And it's a very heavily trafficked trail. People are going to see see this happening. I mean, there'd be no way to get away with that.
Yeah. And then it's the whole idea of why would a criminal be out there?
Yeah.
And that's in that spot.
Is George
in the middle of the desert?
Yeah, as George stated, the park is basically surrounded by a sea of humanity. So it's not like in our first episode where the park was near the Mexico border. This park is literally in the middle of humanity.
Yeah.
There's no reason if you're doing some
it's
type
not
of
a big trafficking line he might have stumbled across.
Yeah,
It's a
that's
short
not going to happen
trail.
in this park.
Yeah, it's a short trail. It should only take a couple hours.
And there was water at the end of it.
And that's like a big thing.
And he had a camelback on so he probably at least had 2 liters of water on him.
Yeah.
And any experienced hiker, as soon as they get to water, they're going to fill that up again.
Yeah. So I mean, the one thing George mentioned in the interview too is what they can run into, because as you heard, we asked about would an animal be interested in human remains as far as bones go? Because he said that coyotes and mountain lions will leave you alone until you've passed, and then they'll obviously
turn into scavengers.
Exactly, but yep. And as you heard, I asked him about just clothing and bone. I know typically animals aren't going to eat bone, but I don't know that area. Is there an animal that typically collects them for nesting or something like that? And he said not really.
No.
But you have the issues with flash flooding because there is no drainage in a desert that they can have things completely washed away. So he said it's kind of a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing in the sense where sometimes that occurs and things wash up and they discover stuff, or
sometimes they wash away and they
sometimes
never
they
find
wash
it.
away. So was it a completely normal thing that happened and then it was moved from a search area? I don't know.
Another thing we looked at too was he left his rental car there, so that rules out that he left the park on his own.
Yeah.
At least driving himself out of there. Now, is it possible that he came off the trail and got into a car with someone else? It's possible, but
yeah.
It's a really
possible,
busy park, and there would have been a witness.
But far-fetched.
Yeah, because they pretty much interviewed everyone that was in that area after his wife reported him missing, and you'd think that someone would have said, "Oh yeah, I saw him walk out of the trail and get into somebody else's car."
Yep.
That would be something a couple people probably see.
Yeah, and unlike last case that was 40 years ago,
yeah,
this is now it's blasted all over the news. It's been in the Desert Sun news for several articles and news broadcasts.
Pretty much across the southwestern United States, this story has been in and out of the news for the last couple months.
Yeah.
So anybody who follows hiking or anything like this,
and if you've been to that area,
yeah,
I'd say it's pretty much if you don't follow the hiking stuff, you're not going to hear about it in the news around us by Wisconsin. But if you live down there,
yeah,
they had a ton of stories about it because it's not a very common thing for someone to disappear.
Yeah, Paul, George was saying that this is a very uncommon thing to happen in his park.
Yeah, which surprised me.
Yeah.
I even asked him. I said, with all those people, are you having a lot of these issues? He said, not really. And the only hiker that they've had still missing was 9 years ago. Basically a year before he started his position. So that actually did surprise me, but that also weighs into how heavily trafficked this park is and how short the trails are.
And that weighs into how bizarre this case is. I mean, people going missing in Joshua Tree National Park is very, very rare.
Yeah.
Anyone who gets disoriented or lost gets found within 24 hours, 99.99% of the time.
And again, not to be morbid, but they'll find the body. If they did perish because of something, they find them. And it's very rare that it's completely without a trace. So there's the possibility that always, months from now, someone can stumble across a bone or whatever, and it can be identified. But it's pretty crazy.
This case almost baffles me more than the Paul Fugate case, because that one seemed to have he came across some criminal activity going on and potentially disappeared.
It's so close to the border, and not to rehash a case, but it just got so weird at the end.
Yeah.
It's almost like a bunch of people knew something else was happening, but no one was talking about it.
But this one...
This is a regular guy who hikes, and it's modern times, I guess, makes it seem more baffling because we have the technology, we have the manpower, we have the experience. It's heavily traveled, we have witnesses, and there's nothing.
Yeah. We have the most advanced technology available to search and rescue right now in the form of, the helicopters with that imaging technology. I'm sure they're also using helicopters with FLIR on it for nighttime searches. It's It's baffling. We tried to think of every possibility that doesn't sound absolutely crazy to explain what happened to Paul.
Yeah, we kept coming back to, well, we can't talk about aliens.
Can't talk about aliens. We
It's the
can't
middle
talk
of the
about
day.
Bigfoot.
Yeah, but it's just
Or
it's,
Sasquatch.
I know, but it's yeah, he went there, disappeared. They haven't found anything. Looking for months, using the technology. There's people out there looking for him.
Yeah.
And in modern society, around heavily trafficked areas,
Late 2018, a connected society. Everyone's got cell phones. Everyone's got GPS. Everyone's,
That was the one thing we didn't bring up. I forgot about that. He left his cell phone at the hotel.
Oh, that's a good point.
So, and they said it's spotty connection to the park, and I had that in the notes, and I forgot where I put it, but he didn't bring his cell phone. But again, I've done that too. If you're kind of on your trip and you're going to run out and grab something real quick, I'm going to grab the bare essentials to make that thing happen and go. So he wanted that picture of Binghorn sheep, and I'm right there with him.
Yeah.
I go...
Well, he thought he was going to be gone for an hour.
And I carry so much extra equipment to get that shot.
Yeah.
Like, I bring drones out and stuff where I can because some parks don't allow it. Like, I bring camera equipment. So, I'll pack my bag for backcountry and it'll be under, 30 pounds. And that's good because a lot of people will be at 50. But then I'll put in 15 pounds of camera equipment. Because, I'm kind of right there. Like I said, I'm right there with Paul. Like, if I can get a cool shot of us hiking or some animal, I'm not trying to be on National Geographic, but it just really helps me relive that scene. So for him, he wanted to take back something memorable from his trip, and he really wanted that picture. Again, not the actions of somebody who's trying to disappear.
It is very disappointing that he didn't have his phone with him, because even spotty connection, you would assume they'd be able to track his location
The GPS
via
stuff,
GPS. And
they could ping the cell phone, I think.
They could ping it, or they could at least figure out, an hour ago he was in these coordinates. It's every one of these cases, there's always something where, Paul Fugate not having his radio or Paul Miller forgetting his cell phone. It's kind of like, man, if you had that on you,
if they just had that on him, we probably wouldn't be talking about it.
And he'd be found.
That's
the saddest part.
That's almost like a warning for people going out. It's like, just bring your cell phone, man. Just bring.
I have an iPhone, so I bring it for the camera.
I know I bring mine for the camera, but there is some truth in the sense that just have it with you, because why not? And
it's another tool for in case something happens to you. Will you have service? Maybe, maybe not.
But in Colorado, we didn't have service, and I got to 13,000 feet on this mountain. All of a sudden, I got service. And I called my wife. I was like, I'm almost made it to the summit.
Happened to me on Rainier.
Yeah, I know.
I get terrible reception at my house in Milwaukee, but I was on the side of Mount Rainier, and I was getting full bars. Yeah. So explain that one. But
before we wrap up, I do want to cut to George's final comments about how his team takes to search and rescue cases in the park.
Just let me say in closing that, to a lot of people, this is a headline in a newspaper or on a TV telecast. To us at the Park Service, we take these situations very, very seriously, because we know that it's not just a person out there that's lost. There's an extended group of people that care about this person, that love this person, that would at least like to have closure in these incidents. And I just want to assure the public, we take it very seriously as a part of our job. And we will continue to do our very best to try to bring closure to these two cases and to anything else that would arise in the park.
Absolutely. George, thank you very much for taking your time to come on the show and answer some of these questions. I always like getting the information from people that are there every day and know it best, rather than me and Mike trying to convey what the park's like or what the conditions are like. So thanks again for coming on the show, and I hope we can contact you in the future for more interviews.
All right, Joe, good talking with you. Have a good holiday season.
You too. So that was George, and again, thank you very much for coming on the show, and thanks to the Park Service. We're going to try and wrap things up now. Mike, why don't you take it away?
Unfortunately, we can't really come to a conclusion.
Nope.
What happened to Paul?
Yeah, we won't really come to many conclusions on any of these episodes.
Yeah,
but
it is called Locations Unknown.
Yeah. If locations were known, it would just be us reporting the news.
If anything develops in this case down the road, we definitely will revisit Paul Miller.
Yeah, this is so fresh. We will probably see updates. We even debated doing this episode because it was so new, but there's a lot of interesting facts outside of just a normal missing persons
And
case.
if you know anything about the case, obviously call the National Park Service, call Joshua Tree State Park. The family has several Facebook pages ongoing right now where they're trying to get any type of information on Paul. If you have anything that you might know, go to their page.
Yep, there is a GoFundMe. From what I read, Paul was the main income earner in the household. So they have a GoFundMe if you want to help the family. It does, obviously, none of it's good, but it's, as someone with kids, if I had something like that happen to me, their kids are grown up, which totally helps.
Yeah.
So still not a good thing, but the kids are older, so it's a little bit better for the family. But yeah, go to the GoFundMe.
If you can spare anything, go to the GoFundMe and contribute. It's a sad case. Maybe one day one of these cases we'll be able to report at the end that somebody was actually found.
Yeah.
But if you like these episodes, check out our first episode on Paul Fugate. Also, you can visit us online at locationsunknown.org, at locationsunknown on Facebook and Instagram.
Absolutely. And we'd like to thank the Joshua Tree National Park Ranger Service and George for allowing us to do the interview on the air.
Any feedback you have on the episode, let us know on Facebook. We got some good feedback on the first episode, and we interact with everyone who comments on.
Yeah, so if we made it worse, let us know.
Yeah.
We can undo it and go back. We can go back to the way it was before.
Yeah, so with that said, everyone have a good holiday if you don't hear from us again before Christmas, and we'll talk to you soon.